Good morning, everybody. Today's proceedings are, at least in part, going to be live streamed. Those with electronic devices may use them to transmit what they hear in the hearing room, but only after 15 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're describing. Such devices may not be used for recording or photography. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Docker, just a couple of questions to follow up from yesterday to start with. First of all, I showed you a report that was about the SWP and the Trevor Monaville campaign.
Yes.
Could you just help us with the likely customer for that intelligence within Special Branch?
The customer would have been C Squad.
And any particular desk within C Squad?
Whichever desk covered the SWP.
Any others?
Not that I can recall, no.
Secondly, I asked you a little bit about undercover officers generating more than one false identity using more than one deceased children's identities. I want to show you a couple of documents which relate to John Dines. First of all, could we have up, please, 746348. This is a report about John Dines. It's in the context of security after problems with Mike Chitty in the 1990s. So it's long after your time. But if we could go, please, to page 3. Attached to this profile about Chitty is a card with information on it. Are you familiar with that format of document?
Not familiar with it, no.
It's about John Dines, sets out, as you will see, his warrant number, date of birth,
Yes.
other information relevant to his service in Special Branch and the SDS. And then it sets out his target as London Greenpeace ALF and sets out his cover name, Philip John Barker, known as John. If we could have the manuscript amendment immediately to the right of that name expanded, please. You'll see, on arrest, we'll use one of his 3 names as surname, address as shown. So it appears that somebody at that stage knew that he had more than one identity.
Yes.
If we take that down now, please, could we have up 746348? This is Mr. Dines' witness statement to the inquiry when it comes up. I've got a wrong reference. Can we have up Mr. Dines' first witness statement to the inquiry, please? Thank you. Could we have page 73? And I'm looking for paragraph 139.
That's my statement, I think.
Yes, it's John, the same as John Dines.
The reference number is UCPI, lots of zeros, 35078.
Thank you, sir. Page 73. Paragraph 139.4 at the bottom. I can only surmise that I used the name Wayne Cadigan when arrested on the 31st of March 1990 because of panic, confusion and uncertainty on my part. I can't recall what I was thinking at the time. I think it was accepted practice that in the event of arrest you would mislead the officers by using your assumed identity. Having a second identity would have been considered a mark of credibility to those with whom I associated with in my cover identity. It was a way to ingratiate or insinuate myself with them. The use of false documentation by others upon whom I was reporting was not uncommon. Although the custody record relating to my arrest on this occasion indicates that I was in possession of a driving license when arrested, I do not recall having the license or what name was on it. I have also considered documentation which shows that a license in the name Wayne Cadigan existed in 1988, bearing the same address and date of birth shown on the custody record. I don't recall having a license in the name Wayne Cadigan, but I accept the records in the witness pack suggest that I did. I obviously applied for the license, but I don't recall the application process. It is our understanding that there was a DVLA record in the name Wayne Cadigan, which is a material name, in June of 1988, which of course is when you were serving in the SDS. Do you have any recollection now of Mr. Dines telling you, or you speaking to him, about a driving license in a second cover identity?
I have no recollection of that whatsoever. The only name that is vaguely familiar to me is his original cover name.
Your evidence yesterday was that an officer should not have more than one cover identity, and if you had discovered an officer with a second identity, it's likely that the officer would have been removed from the squad. Having read Mr. Dines' evidence about the purpose for which he used it, does that remain your evidence or not?
I had no indication as an SDS manager that officers had more than one identity. If they had had another identity and I had found out about it, certainly I would have looked at it very seriously, with a view perhaps to removing them from SDS, but it would have had to depend on the circumstances, and I would have probably had to take some counsel from senior officers as well.
And having seen what Mr. Dines has said, a way to ingratiate or insinuate himself with his target group, and a practice that was not uncommon amongst them, what would your view have been on those facts?
Well, in those days, I did not have a view on those facts because I simply did not know about it.
That's why my question was, what would your view have been?
What would my view have been in those days?
Yes.
Had I known about it,
Yes.
I would have taken steps to stamp that practice out.
Could we take that document down now, please? Could we have up 749045? This is your witness statement to the inquiry, page 104, please. And paragraph,
That's 109.
yes, I need paragraph 328 on paragraph 104, please. Thank you. Paragraph 328 reads, I have been referred to, then there's a document reference, which reports on an individual's bank account details. I do not recall this. It is nothing SDS would pursue, but I can see that a copy of this has gone to the security service, and they might well pursue it. So we can see that bank details were sometimes reported. Was any special consideration given to the reporting of confidential information such as bank account details?
In my position as a manager then, I had no information about any of the officers' individual bank accounts.
This is not officers' bank accounts.
No,
these are
this
the
is
bank
a
accounts of
Yeah.
either activists
Yes.
or the groups that they are members of.
Yeah.
Was there any special consideration given to recording the financial details of members of the public and political groups?
No special arrangements at all, as far as I can remember. This was obviously included within a report from the officer, and it was forwarded in the normal course of events.
Had you ever had any training about confidential information in the circumstances in which a police officer could take confidential information before you joined the SDS?
No.
And we can take it you didn't have any whilst you were in the SDS?
No.
Could we take that down, please? Could we have up next tab B70, sir, 740559. This is an intelligence report dated the 17th of June 1988. You will see that it's one that you have signed. Could we look first of all at paragraph 2? Privacy, a schoolgirl, aged 16 and a half years of address, is developing into a highly active animal rights campaigner. Were there any guidelines about reporting on children within Special Branch?
None that I'm aware of.
And as we know, none within the SDS?
No.
On what basis then would a decision be taken as to whether or not to record and put on file intelligence about a schoolgirl aged 16 and a half?
This report, which would be part of the intelligence that the officer has obtained, would have been sent again across to the appropriate squad. They would have decided what should be referenced in Special Branch records. That would not have been my decision.
Your decision was whether or not to let it out of the SDS office to go up to C Squad?
I didn't at the time give that a lot of consideration, I must confess, but it was part of the intelligence report, and therefore I didn't see it as my job to redact that particular part of it.
Could we go to paragraph 3, please? Privacy lives with her divorced mother, whom it appears is unable to exercise any parental control over her. When not at home, Privacy stays with her boyfriend, Privacy, in the Croydon area. She is additionally a member of the women's movement and has several lesbian friends in central and south London with whom she has occasional affairs. Again, were there any guidelines on reporting the sexual activity and sexual orientation of children?
Not that I can recall.
Or of adults?
Not that I can recall.
This intelligence is certainly not necessary for public order reasons, is it?
No, it's part of the intelligence report from the officer.
It's not relevant to subversion?
Possibly not.
When you say possibly not, Once we've had the next paragraph, I'll come back to that question. If we could zoom out for the moment, though, is it right that this was not copied to the security service? It doesn't appear to bear a box 500 stamp.
No, I can't tell without seeing the minute sheet. It's unlikely, I would think.
What was Special Branch's interest in this adolescent's sex life?
I don't think we had any interest in it at all, but it became part of the intelligence report and as such was forwarded in the normal course of events.
If you had no interest in her sex life at all, and it's obviously a very sensitive part of somebody's life, why wasn't this excised?
I can't answer that.
I mean, it should have been, shouldn't it?
I don't necessarily agree with that. Excuse me. The inference is that this young lady will develop into a highly active animal rights campaigner, as it says in paragraph 2. It therefore might have been apposite at the time to have details of her on file should that come to fruition.
Including her sex life?
I don't regard that would not have been recorded. Apart from in this report, it would not have been a consideration, really.
Was there any culture within Special Branch or the SDS of scrutinising reports to take out material which wasn't necessary for policing purposes?
In terms of what we were doing on the unit and in the office, the answer to that would be no.
Could we look at paragraph 4, please? Privacy is an active member of Croydon Animal Aid, Bromley Animal Rights Group and Sidcup Hunt Saboteurs Group. She is also attempting to form an animal rights youth group in South London. This venture, however, has not met with a very positive response. On Monday the 13th of June, she was present at the picket outside the Old Bailey at the commencement of the Clark and Shepherd trial. In addition, she is a member of the anti-apartheid movement and regularly attends the picket outside South Africa House. So we get a description of her campaigning activities. There is no suggestion there that she is committing any criminal offences, is there?
Not in that paragraph.
So coming back to the question of subversion, there's nothing there about that's subversive either, is there?
No, but it does say she's a member of a saboteurs group and they have a propensity to cause public disorder. Therefore, in my view, that is a perfectly relevant thing for the officer to report.
Could we take that down now, please? Could we go back to your witness statement, 749045, page 104. Paragraph 329, please. I have been referred to the identification of a report which reports on the sexuality of a member of the target group. With the collection and collation of intelligence, you did not know if that sort of information might have held current or even future reference. It might have been helpful for potentially approaching them as an informant in the future, and also for background information as to the context in which they joined a subversive group. This is relevant to recruitment tactics of the group. We understand that report, as it says in the first line, to relate to sexual orientation. Is it right that sexual orientation would be recorded for the potential of facilitating an approach to an activist to act as an informant?
It may have been relevant. We're talking of 37 years ago, and in those days, I would presume any information on a prospective informant could be useful.
And would it depend whether their sexuality was open or hidden?
Not particularly.
Well, one sees the leverage one might have over somebody who was hiding something, but not in the 1980s somebody who was openly gay. Do you agree?
I'm not quite sure I understand the tenor of your question. I regard this as merely information that may be useful in a possible approach to them, nothing more than that.
How would it be useful?
It would give an opening gambit, perhaps, to talk to them. I don't know. I'm not an informant recruiter. It might not be relevant for Special Branch at all. It might have been relevant for the security service, but I don't know.
Was it your understanding that this sort of information was wanted and recorded because it was wanted?
It wasn't actively sought, but if it was reported upon by an officer, it would have been forwarded in the normal way.
Can we take that down, please? Sorry, if we could go to page 106 in the same document, paragraph 336. Right at the bottom of the page. I've been referred to an intelligence report attributable to a UCO, which includes the comment that a new member of their target group was, quote, very attractive. That is a very subjective view. It is not what we would encourage UCOs to report on, but they would be permitted to include it. The purpose of this reporting would have been merely to distinguish or identify them for possible future occasions. This did not raise any concerns with me or any other manager to my knowledge with regards to the UCO's attitudes towards individuals whom he was reporting on. I knew he was a thoroughly professional officer. This kind of language was not surprising at the time when the intelligence community was largely staffed by men. It would not have rung alarm bells because, by the standards of the day, it was nothing unusual. Can you help us, please, by what you meant in those last two sentences?
The use of the very short phrase, very attractive, is merely a comment from the officer. I don't regard it as anything more than that. It was something that perhaps, as I've said there, it may have enabled somebody to identify this person on a future occasion. I saw no reason to take it out of the report at the time, and in fact, to be perfectly honest, I don't think it would have even occurred to me.
My question was more directed at what you say in the last two sentences of that paragraph. What was the relevance of the intelligence community being largely male at that time?
Well, presumably that we have to have a lady there who was very attractive. It's merely a comment that would have been made at the time.
So somebody is remarking on a woman's sexual attractiveness.
Just remarking on their attractiveness.
And that is something that would happen in the course of events when officers were recording intelligence.
It's nothing unusual, as I've said there.
So that people who were reading the report would know that the woman was attractive.
And that's what he's saying.
For identification purposes, that's very vague and subjective, isn't it?
Correct.
Is the real reason is because in a largely male environment, there was a sexual element to remarking upon the physical attractiveness of female targets?
I don't see that as a sexual element at all. It's merely a comment from the officer concerned, and I would put no more emphasis on it than that.
You talk about the standards of the day. in connection with recording in an official document how attractive a person is, can you help us with the point you're trying to make when you refer to the standards of the day?
The standards of the day in the 1980s are totally different from those of today. And we had a much more, shall we say, male culture then, if I can put it that way. To put a comment in like this, to me, was acceptable, nothing more than that. It probably wouldn't have rung any bells anywhere. Perhaps, on reflection, it might have been a good idea to take it out, but I didn't do that.
So can I take it that it would, when you say nothing unusual, perfectly normal for such remarks to be made?
I would have said so for those days, yes.
And presumably not just on paper, but when people were talking to one another in the office?
I don't think something like that would even come up in the office.
Do you not recall anyone ever remarking upon whether female activists were attractive or otherwise?
No.
In this male environment?
Nope.
Applying 1980s standards?
Nope.
Are you sure about that?
I am, or we would refer to an activist as normally by the names we knew them by.
Could we take that down, please, and have up 742734? And we move on to the main report, please. Page 3. Thank you. 9th of January, 1987. If we could have, this is a report, paragraph 2. It's a report about a woman who's 5'6", has blonde curly hair, and it records details about her. If we could go to paragraph 4, please. Then says, subject recently spent Christmas and the New Year in the London area, and for the most part stayed at the home of Privacy near Guildford. She spent New Year's Eve in the company of Privacy at a party hosted by Lane in Forest Hill. It is extremely likely that Privacy, an attractive woman, will maintain her popularity among leading ALF activists. Did that come with a nudge and a wink?
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Was the purpose of recording that she was an attractive woman and insinuating that she was going to be popular for that reason another example of a sexual dimension to reporting?
No, I don't regard it like that at all. It's merely a description that the officer has put in his report there. And I can't put any more emphasis on it than that.
And again, the sort of thing that was quite normal for an officer to report.
Yes?
Could we take that down now, please? In the office, did you ever hear any banter?
In respect of what?
Anything?
I can't answer that question.
Well, you were there, I wasn't. What I'm driving at is, can you help us with this sort of atmosphere? Was it jovial, jokey, or was it po-faced
No, it was a
and
good
silent?
atmosphere. The office was a good atmosphere.
And would that include banter?
Banter between ourselves, probably, yes.
Did you ever hear any sexual banter?
I can't recall anything. There probably was, to be perfectly honest, within the office environment. I don't know. I can't recall anything.
Sexual jokes?
I don't know. I can't recall them.
Is it likely? 1980s?
I wouldn't have said jokes, no. We were too busy for that.
Innuendo?
Might have been.
The discussion of the attractiveness or otherwise of female activists?
That would have just been minuted and forwarded on in the usual way. I doubt there'd have been any discussion about that whatsoever.
Are you sure?
As sure as I can be.
Can I move now to some of your specific officers under your command? Can we start with the officer we know as HN 82?
82.
82, yeah.
Wait a minute. Got to find it. No. That'd be. Wait a minute. Sorry, I can't find it for the moment. I'll find it in a minute.
Take your time.
HN 82. Right.
The inquiry has evidence that HN 82 on 2 occasions indulged in sexual activity with a member of the public in his undercover identity. Did he ever say anything about that?
No.
Did you ever get any inkling that HN 82 might have been involved in sexual activity?
No.
Does your evidence yesterday that you think that if you'd asked a direct question, the officer would have lied to you, would apply to HN 82?
Quite possibly.
Does it say something about levels of trust and propriety within the SDS if a manager can't rely upon an officer to give an honest answer?
I don't think that in the circumstances where I would have approached the officer like this, he would have admitted that. In the first instance, to give an honest answer would have merely, or may have, brought his SDS career to an end.
I beg your pardon, I've made quite a significant factual error which must be corrected. It's HN 12, not HN 82. Could you check who HN 12 is? Same questions. Do your answers change at all?
Wait a minute. Oh, right. This officer I can't comment upon because I never had any supervision over him. HN 12? No.
Let's move now to HN 11, Mike Chitty.
Oh, right. Yep.
Did he ever say anything to you about any form of sexual activity with one or more activists?
No.
Did anyone else say anything on that subject about him?
About him?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge.
Did you have any inkling that he might be involved sexually with anyone in his undercover identity?
No. As I've said before in my evidence, Chitty was coming to the end of his SDS career when I joined SDS. He was a rather uncommunicative person anyway, quite difficult to talk to, and he would not have told me anything about what was going on in respect of his undercover life.
Did you ever hear anything, whether in connection to Mike Chitty or otherwise, about an orgy in a tent?
In preparing my statement, I remember reading something about that, I think, but in terms of my duties at the time, no.
Can we bring up your witness statement 749045, page 133? Paragraph 424. I was aware that following the end of his deployment, Mike Chitty continued to spend time in his cover identity with some of those with whom he had associated during his deployment. Some years later, I heard a rumour to that effect, but I did not know anything more than that until reading my Rule 9 request. Could you expand upon that, please, and explain to us what it was that you heard?
The only thing I heard was that Mike Chitty was still associating with people in his cover identity after he had finished his tour of duty on SDS.
Did you hear anything about the circumstances, and in particular whether it involved him keeping in touch with a woman?
No, I didn't have any details, and this was merely a rumour, if you like, something that I heard. I can't remember where, I can't remember when, but I didn't get any more information than that.
Did there come a point in time when you learned that Mike Chitty had been involved in a sexual relationship with a woman called Lizzie?
I can't specifically recall the name, but I think I would have come across it preparing my statement a year ago, yes.
Did you know before you became the chief superintendent, a superintendent on S Squad?
I can't answer that question, I don't know.
Can we move now to Bob Lambert? Did Detective Chief Inspector Waite ever say anything to you about Lambert having got a girl into trouble?
No.
Or possibly having done so?
No.
Or anything else touching the pregnancy, possible or otherwise, of a member of the public by him?
I had nothing from Tony Waite on that, and in fact, when I did hear about it, I was absolutely horrified.
When did you first hear about it?
Long after I left SDS.
When did you first know that he had in fact fathered a child?
After I left SDS, as I say, I can't tell you exactly when.
Did D.I. Barber say anything to you at all?
Not a thing.
Anybody else?
Nope.
We know that Bob Lambert had in fact fathered a child, and that he was in contact with that child whilst you were managing him and Jackie, TBS's mother. Does it follow from your evidence that he was left to manage the situation entirely on his own?
He did, because he didn't communicate anything of this to me. I had, as I've said, absolutely no idea.
And if you had had an idea, what would you have done?
I'd have probably removed him from SDS straight away.
And what would you have done in terms of the question of should Jackie be told who Bob Lambert really was?
That would be a question that would have to be dealt with, I would presume, at a higher level, because it may risk compromising the whole of the SDS operation. So I can't answer the question, which is a theoretical one anyway, but there would have to be serious consideration given to telling the lady concerned exactly who he was.
And the fact there was a child, TBS, presumably reinforced the need to give that question anxious consideration.
Yes.
But above your pay grade.
I would have said so.
Did you have any knowledge that Bob Lambert was sometimes seen with a child?
No.
Would you have seen Bob Lambert from time to time in his undercover identity in surveillance photographs?
I don't recall ever seeing him in a surveillance photograph.
Or reading reports from other sources which referred to what he was doing undercover?
I do not have a recollection of reading any reports from other sources.
Might that have happened?
It might.
Did you know that he was making repeated trips to Dagenham?
No.
Was there any way in which the management of the SDS would pick up a pattern like that?
Very unlikely, unless he was claiming expenses for travelling, something like that, which would show that sort of pattern. The SDS officer, he or she, was given a lot of free rein. And by the very nature of the job they were doing, how can I explain it? The supervision strings, if you like, were lengthened considerably from what they would be in normal policing. It was therefore very, very difficult, without putting a surveillance team on him, for which I had no reason to do, to know exactly where he was going on a particular day.
Would it have been a good idea to keep an eye on expenses claims and things like that to look for patterns which might at least beg questions to be followed up?
Well, that begs the whole tenor of the question. Did I have any idea that he had fathered a child? And the answer is no.
But in terms of the limitations on supervision of undercover police officers and the risk that they might go off the rails in one way or another, wouldn't a system to keep an eye out on things like expenses claims to look for patterns have been a good idea?
It might have been, but I'm not sure we'd have had the time to indulge in that type of in-depth analysis. The sergeants in the office dealt with the expenses a lot of the time. I did not concern myself at my level with their expenses claims unless there was a problem.
Did you have any knowledge that Bob Lambert was making regular financial payments to Jackie?
No.
If you had known that, would you have pursued it?
Yes.
Are you able to assist us at all whether expenses claims were made by Lambert to pay maintenance to Jackie for TBS?
I cannot answer that, and the reason being that most of the expenses claims in those days were paid to the officers in cash. They would bring in receipts for their rent, other receipts for expenses, and they were paid out in cash.
Was there ever any talk by Bob Lambert of a child being adopted?
Not that I can recall, no.
I'm going to move from Jackie and TBS to a woman we're calling RLC. It was Mr. Lambert's evidence that he did get involved in sexual activity with RLC. Did Bob Lambert ever say anything to you about that?
No.
Was there ever any innuendo, banter, any other cause to think that there was a suggestion that he might have been doing so?
No.
With either RLC or any other woman?
No.
I'm going to move now to the woman who is not anonymous, Belinda Harvey. She first met Bob Lambert in April 1987. Did Bob Lambert say anything to you about meeting her?
No.
We know that he spent a lot of time at an address in Forest Gate, 86 Marjorie Park Road, where Belinda Harvey was living. Did he tell you he was staying there?
No.
Did you ever ask him where he was staying?
No.
Why not?
He had a registered address which was provided for him and paid for by the Metropolitan Police. That is the only address, as far as I was concerned, that he had.
Presumably it was known that sometimes officers would need to spend the night somewhere else.
Yes, that's accepted.
And did you as a manager keep tabs on that?
No.
Wouldn't it have been a good idea?
It might have been. I'm not sure what it would have achieved.
Are we back to the officer might well have lied to you?
Yes.
Did he tell you that he was going to concerts to see bands like REM, Peter Gabriel and Squeeze?
I have no memory of that at all.
Might he have done so?
He might have done, but I don't know.
Did he tell you who he was going with?
Unlikely, but he may well have done. I can't answer those questions because I have no memory of them.
Did you ever see Lambert in his undercover identity personally, perhaps if you were acting as a cover officer?
Yes, when he was arrested.
We talked about the Horsham and Crawley earlier. I'm thinking more generally.
No.
When you saw him at Horsham and Crawley Hunt, was he in the company of any women?
I don't recall that because he was stepping out the back of a police van at the time with some other of his comrades.
Did you not see him at any other point of time in the day?
No. No, he was taken there. He was kept, as I explained yesterday, for I think 2 hours, and then he was released. And once he was released, as far as I was concerned, my job of covering him was complete.
We saw yesterday that there was surveillance in place in August 1987 when the IID plot was being monitored closely. Did you see, can you recall whether you gleaned as a result of that any inkling of who Lambert was mixing with?
I didn't see the surveillance logs. I don't recall seeing photographs at all.
If you had seen a photograph which tended to suggest that Lambert was very close to a woman, is that something that you would have paid any attention to or not?
If I'd seen a photograph of Bob Lambert with a woman next to him, it would not necessarily have given me any concern.
If you'd seen a photograph which suggested an intimate connection?
If I may have pursued the matter, but I didn't see any photographs.
Did Detective Sergeant Couch say anything to you about the search that he conducted of Lambert's accommodation in September 1987?
Not that I can recall.
It's Mr. Lambert's evidence is that there was a photograph in his room, possibly on his bedside table, of him with Belinda Harvey. Can you recall whether anyone said anything to you about that?
To the best of my knowledge, nobody told me anything about that.
We've had evidence from Belinda Harvey that Mr. Lambert moved in to live with her for a period in a flat in a tower block in Hackney. Did he tell you that?
No.
Could we have up, please, 34980? Page 10. At the bottom, please. One evening I called over there after work, as I often did. This is mid-November 1988, and by this stage the evidence is that Belinda Harvey had moved out of the flat. Only this time I found Greta shaking. She looked absolutely terrified. "The flat's been raided," she announced dramatically, her eyes wide with horror. Raided by who? Special Branch. I was so stunned that I felt my legs fall beneath me. She lit a roll-up cigarette. I noticed that her hands were still trembling as she held up her lighter. I felt equally terrified. I didn't know much, but I knew that Special Branch didn't call for a social visit. They were anti-terrorist police. My job flashed through my mind, and I wondered what my manager would say if he knew. It wouldn't exactly be good for my promotion prospects. But why? What did they want? I asked, desperate to know. They said that they were looking for Bob, but didn't they say why? Did they say anything else? No, but they looked through some of your stuff. In fact, one of them picked up a pair of your shoes and asked who they belonged to. I suddenly felt desperately scared. "And what did you say?" "They asked if they were mine, but I said no, those belonged to Belinda." "You gave them my name," I gasped. "It's okay. I didn't give your surname or anything, but I was petrified." What the hell had Bob been up to? When I later relayed the news to him, he seemed equally scared. "I'm going to have to disappear," he said. My breath caught inside my chest and I felt the room closing in on me. I was utterly terrified. Terrified I'd never see Bob again. If you could bear that in mind now, please, and if we could have up 737217. Page 11, please. Paragraph 90. And this is the witness statement of Belinda Harvey. What we were reading from a moment ago was the book Deep Deception. I remember that the flat at Seaton Point was raided by the police, possibly while both Bob and I were living there, although I may have moved into Sack Road by then, I can't recall. I went to Seaton Point from work and found that Bob was not there, but Howard and Natalie North were there. I just remember that my shoes were by the door, as if they'd been thrown there. Natalie North and Howard told me that the police had picked up the shoes and asked whose shoes they were. They told the police they are Belinda's. I asked what else did they say about me, and they told me that they said nothing else. They did say that the police were looking for Bob. This, of course, was very late in Mr. Lambert's deployment, shortly before he withdrew altogether. Was there, given that he was pretending to be a man who was going on the run, an arrangement for a police raid to make that exfiltration story more credible?
I have no information about that whatsoever. It's the first I've ever seen of that. I didn't know about it. I can't completely say there was or wasn't any arrangement because I simply don't know. It looks as if that was the anti-terrorist squad rather than Special Branch doing the raid.
If the raid was part and parcel of bolstering Lambert's cover, presumably you would have known about it.
I would have hoped so, and I have no knowledge of this whatsoever.
presumably you would have had to be part and parcel as the DCI at that time of instigating it.
The one query I have on this is the date is November, is it, 1988?
Yes.
Was I still on SDS then?
You leave during the course of November 1988 is our understanding.
Right. I don't know anything about this. I'm sorry, I can't help you.
Can we take that down now? On your evidence, you knew nothing at all about Lambert's sexual activity with members of the public undercover.
No.
And yet, whilst you are his manager, we know that he is sexually deceiving Belinda Harvey. We know he sexually deceives RLC. We know that he is in contact with Jackie, keeping in touch with TBS, and there is a question mark over exactly how long the sexual relationship with Jackie went on. That is a lot of sexual activity on your watch, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you find it surprising that happened without your knowledge?
I'm not surprised, because it is very, very difficult to keep effective control over an SDS officer, and they are recruited for their intelligence, their work, their ability to work unsupervised. Now, in terms of what Bob was apparently up to, as I've said before, had I challenged him on it, he would almost certainly have denied everything to me, because had he admitted it, that would have been the end of his SDS career anyway, and I was genuinely horrified when I found out that he had actually fathered a child.
So is it a fair summation of your evidence on this topic that you did nothing to prevent UCOs under your command entering into and pursuing sexual relationships with members of the public because you thought it was futile to try to do so?
No, I disagree with what you said there. You started off by saying words to the effect that I did nothing to prevent it. There obviously would have been, at the recruitment process, basically telling them that they were not to indulge in sexual relationships. How and when that would have occurred, I can't remember now. But the point I'm making is that to have challenged the officer when he is an officer in the field like that would have not have achieved anything, because it would simply be denied.
Subject to the evidence you've just given about a warning at the start, at the recruitment stage, did you do anything else to prevent UCOs under your command entering into sexual relations with members of the public in their undercover identities?
No.
Can I move to HN 87, please? Did HN 87 discuss with you spending time in squats?
Sorry, I'm confused at the moment. HN 87?
Yes.
Yes, no, I have that, yeah.
Did he tell you that he was spending time in the course of his duties in squats?
He may have done, I can't recall.
Did he describe to you the conditions within squats?
Not particularly.
They're very different sometimes, aren't
They
they,
can
to
be, yes.
police officers' normal ways of living?
They are, but that's part of the acceptance of being an SDS officer. You have a cover flat which will probably be not the type of accommodation you're used to.
Did he discuss life in a squat with you?
I have no recollection of him doing that specifically, no.
Did he ever speak with you about the practice of sharing beds within squats?
No.
Including sharing beds with female squatters?
No.
Did he speak of any form of sexual activity with any of them?
Not to me, he didn't.
Did anybody else
I don't know.
did anybody else mention, even in jest?
No.
Coming back to Bob Lambert, do you still think he deserves his commendation now you know what you do about how he actually behaved undercover?
His commendation was based on his work, as we would have said, in the field, and for his penetration of an extremely disruptive extremist group. That was awarded to him at the time when, if I'm right, none of this was known anyway. If you want me to give you an honest answer, which I'm sure you do, I would still give him the commendation for his work there. I can separate those two aspects.
You've used the verb separate, but by holding the view that he still deserves a commendation, are you not diminishing the importance and the gravity of Mr. Lambert's misconduct?
No, I'm separating them. I'm separating the work he did with his, no doubt, ill judgment in terms of his sexual activities.
Is it that you still don't think it's all that important?
I do think it's important.
Can I put to you an apology that was made on behalf of the Commissioner at the start of Tranche 2? It's about managerial failings. I'm going to ask you to what extent you agree with it. The MPS recognises the seriousness of these failings. Much of the evidence of misconduct and all the SDS's managers' evidence will be considered in Tranche 2, Phase 2, and in due course in Module 2B hearings. Nonetheless, the MPS can say at this stage that the SDS should have been the subject of robust oversight and intervention by senior managers so that professional standards and conduct were reviewed and maintained throughout its duration. Poor standards and misconduct should have been identified and dealt with swiftly before they became embedded into the culture of the unit. UCOs whose conduct fell below acceptable standards should have been identified, removed from the field, and disciplined where necessary. Now, on that last note, we're going to come in a little while to Mr. Scutt, where precisely that happened. But putting Mr. Scutt for one side and focusing on the sexual misconduct, management of officers within the SDS, do you agree with the criticism that the Commissioner has made and the apology?
I think the apology is right. What I would say, firstly, hindsight is a wonderful medium. We are applying, as I've said before, perhaps the standards of today to what occurred in the 1980s. The second point I would say is that the SDS operation was unique, and it brought with it unique challenges and unique problems. And one of those problems was the ability for middle and senior management to supervise their officers. And there was necessarily a huge amount of discretion given to the officers when they were out in the field. To bring in robust, as you say, measures to supervise them far more closely may have been possible. That would have needed detailed planning. It may also have disrupted in some way the whole focus of an SDS operation. So, whilst I accept the apology is correct, I cannot accept totally the Commissioner's words about the failure of SDS management, because, quite frankly, we did the best we could at the time.
Would it be fair to extract from that answer, amongst other things, the importance that was attached to the ends that the SDS was trying to achieve?
The SDS was formed, as you know, in 1968. Thank you, it had gone from my mind. And it was formed basically to counter public order problems and to provide the Commissioner with useful and timely intelligence to save on policing costs, etc., etc. That remained the SDS's reason for being. I'm sorry, I've lost control of the question now. What was your question?
It was about how important the ends were, because you were saying that if
yes,
more robust controls had been brought in, it might have distracted from the SDS's aim. So what I'm inviting you to develop is just how important the SDS and its senior managers saw those aims.
Those aims were paramount, but again we come back to something we discussed yesterday about where do you draw a line, and which is a very, very difficult line to draw. As you know, when I left, I made certain recommendations to try and enhance and refine the SDS operation. I think those were taken up. Whether that has affected the acquisition of the product, I don't know. I've had no contact about that whatsoever. But it is a chicken and egg situation, if you like, that the more control you try and exercise over officers doing a job like this, the less chance they may have to acquire the exceptional intelligence that was acquired on a few occasions. Does that make sense? I don't know if I've made much sense to you there, but
Thank you. I'm going to move to another topic now, which is visits by senior officers. We touched on this a little yesterday. I'm going to show you two documents first. First of all, 728976. Page 9, please. This is from the annual report for 1987. And if we could have, now you've seen the title page, page 14, paragraph 13. Paragraph 13 records a visit during 1987 of the Assistant Commissioner Special Operations, Mr. Dello, and the Deputy Assistant Commissioner Special Branch, Mr. Crawshaw, on the 19th of February. It stated that the meeting took place at a West London safe flat, was conducted in a constructive and friendly manner, and a useful exchange of views took place concerning all aspects of the SDS operation. This visit was viewed by all officers as a success. Is that a fair summary?
would seem to be. I think that was slightly before my time, but yes, it would seem to be.
And if we go to 730311, I think February, by the way, I think February 87 was in your time, wasn't it? You were DI by that stage.
Was I? Okay, sorry.
And 730311, page 13, please. Minute 1. The list of SDS field officers at 1B has been compiled for the information of ACSO for his visit to SDS on Thursday the 3rd of March 1988. I have also attached a note of the details of command and support personnel. The present arrangement is for ACSO and yourself to be met by DCI Docker at Back Hall at 12 noon and then conveyed by SDS car to the West London flat. ACSO's diary has been noted accordingly. A full turnout of personnel is expected. I will be present. Now, when we spoke about these yesterday, the emphasis was on deceased children's identities. Can I this time develop that and ask you, to what extent were the senior officers talking about and being appraised of the SDS as targets?
In this particular case, I do remember this. I remember the Assistant Commissioner who came out, and as it says on the minute, I had to supply him with a briefing of the SDS officers and the fields within which they were engaged. When he came out, he'd obviously done his homework, and he spoke to each officer in turn, and he asked them relevant questions about their groupings, that type of thing.
Was any inquiry made about training?
No.
You say that with some certainty. Could you explain why you're so certain about that?
You're talking about making an inquiry from an Assistant Commissioner about training?
Yes.
No. No.
So there's no interest in whether or not there was training, and if so, how effective it was?
Not as far as I was concerned. The purpose of this visit from, it was Mr. Hugh Annesley, was to visit the officers, talk to them, see what they're doing, and in many respects satisfy himself that the SDS operation was proceeding in a way that he would have wished.
To so satisfy himself, wouldn't he have to ask questions?
He did ask questions, but the questions he asked, from my memory, were relevant to the officers' groupings and their work within those groupings.
Can you recall anything about in what depth that was explored?
Probably 2 or 3 questions for each officer, I'd have thought.
Anything or any curiosity about how undercover officers interacted with the courts?
Not that I can remember, no.
Anything about participation in crime and the dilemmas that might pose?
Nope, nothing.
How inquisitive was Mr. Annesley?
He was briefed. The idea behind this is to make sure that whoever the senior officer is, not only is on side, if you like, with the SDS, but they have a knowledge of what the operation is about. We're not asking for in-depth knowledge, but a knowledge, because I think I'm right that the person who writes the Home Office for continuation of the operation is the Assistant Commissioner.
Would it be a fair description to call it a familiarisation visit?
Maybe, yes.
Could we take that document down now, please, and have 749045? You've told us a little about the Assistant Commissioner's purpose in the visit. I now want to look at the other side of the coin and what the SDS got from it. At page 18 of your witness statement, paragraph 57, you addressed that. The purpose of these visits was to make sure the UCOs knew their work was valued and to boost morale. Visits like this also gave UCOs an opportunity to speak to senior managers. The visits would apprise the senior commander of what was going on. This was an insurance policy, so that they could not say they did not know about it. It also made sure that they understood the nature of the UCO's work and their output. Can you help us, please, by what you meant by an insurance policy?
Probably a bad choice of phrase on my part. The idea behind it is that A, they have a knowledge of what is going on there, and B, they would not be able to turn round at a later date and say they didn't know anything about the operation.
And so an insurance policy for the SDS?
You could look at it like that, I suppose, but it was really to also boost, if you like, the morale of the SDS officers, in that they knew that the senior officers of the Metropolitan Police valued their work.
Is the context that you know that your unit is doing something which, if it is uncovered, is going to be the subject of considerable comment from the media, from the Home Office, and so forth?
That is a consideration, yes.
I'm going to be vulgar now. The shit would hit the fan.
Exactly the phrase that went through my mind.
You wanted to know that your senior managers knew about what you were doing, so that if the shit hit the fan, you were not going to be left hung out to dry.
Part of it, and as I've said, the rest of it is for them to be apprised of exactly what the SDS were doing and the areas they were working in, and the benefit this accrued in terms of policing costs, the saving of policing costs to the Metropolitan Police.
Indeed. And on that question, can you help us with the feedback you got from senior officers who visited? Marks out of 10 for the SDS, where were you on the scale?
The only one I can remember was this, because I did have a letter from the Assistant Commissioner afterwards, basically saying thank you, very nice day, he enjoyed it, and etc., etc. So in terms of marks out of 10, I don't know, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, something like that. But I think he was quite well impressed by the calibre of the officers and the information they gave him.
So senior officers knew in broad terms what the unit was doing, that it existed, how it was going about its work at a high level of generality, and were fully supportive.
Yes.
So I appreciate this is slightly early, but I'm about to move to a completely different topic, and we are in no danger time-wise.
In which case we'll have our quarter of an hour break now.
All rise.
far.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Docker, just to pick up before we move on to the question of senior officers' visits, you described the satisfaction of the senior officers with the calibre of your undercover officers. However, you've told us earlier this morning that you questioned whether they would answer your inquiries honestly if you'd asked about sexual activity. How do you square the assertion of their high calibre with your very low opinion of their honesty?
I'm not sure I understand that question, but I think you've got to separate the job they do in terms of the product they're getting with the other aspects of their work on SDS, which have led some of them to engage in activities which they know we would not approve of and would definitely or would probably end up in their removal from the SDS.
If there is an issue with your perception of their probity and their honesty, that should have been tackled, shouldn't it?
Again, we're looking at hindsight here. I had no information at the time about any sexual activity by any officer, and perhaps we should have addressed it more, but at the time it simply wasn't raised.
I asked you some questions about whether you knew where Bob Lambert might be, and in particular whether you knew he was at Seaton Point. Your officers were required to call him by telephone every day, weren't they?
Correct. Twice a day.
Twice a day. And one of the purposes of that was to ensure their safety.
Yes.
And presumably knowing where they were and where they were going to spend the night was an important piece of information if you were going to ensure they were safe or react if they were not.
That wasn't required from them. All that was required was they phoned in the office if they had a problem, and they could enunciate over a telephone, bearing in mind they would be using public telephone call boxes. There were no mobile phones then. Otherwise, it was just to confirm to us that they were still alive and still working. There were occasions when officers would say, I cannot phone in later on because I'm doing a demonstration or something like that. Then they would tell us.
Was there a requirement for them to tell you where they were?
No.
Or where they were going to spend the night?
No.
Wouldn't that have been a good idea?
Might have been, but it would have loaded us up with an awful lot of administrative stuff for no real purpose. I couldn't see the benefit of it if we'd insisted on them telling us, where are you going to spend the night? And I suspect the reaction would be, well, why do you need to know that? What's the point in asking for this information? We didn't ask for it. We just needed to know that they were still operating as SDS officers and they were safe.
Safety would have been the first answer to that question,
Yes.
wouldn't it?
Yes.
Could I call up, please, 737160? Page 4. This is a record of a meeting you had with officers from Operation Sparkler. If we follow the numbering of the redactions, of HN 109 discussion with Operation Sparkler, if we go down the page to number 71, there's a paragraph there. HN 109 stated that they were unaware of any relationships between activists and UCOs. However, there had been jokes made about high standards of intelligence being gained from horizontal politics. Does that jog your memory? Do you recall such jokes?
No, not at all.
The other standing joke was that Helen Steele was not very attractive. Do you recall what is described as a standing joke?
No, not at all.
How is it if 109 recalls there being jokes of with a sexual innuendo and conversations about how attractive female activists were or were not, that you don't recall them?
I don't know. It's 37 years ago. I do not have perfect recall, and I do not remember this.
Would you accept then, if your recall is not perfect, that there is no reason not to believe HN 109 about this?
If HN 109 has said that, knowing the officer as I do, then I would accept that.
Would you accept that for Helen Steele now to have to read that is something particularly hurtful?
It probably would be for the lady, yes.
Thank you. Could we take that down now, please? Are you a Freemason?
No,
Were you in the time that you were serving in the SDS?
I have never been a Freemason.
I want to move now to the question of Stephen Scutt. Could we have up 748500? This is the AQR for Stephen Scutt, and the other comment box at the bottom appears to have been completed by you and dated the 23rd of April 1987. I'll give you a moment to refresh your memory. It's a glowing report, isn't it?
It is.
Work of the very, very highest quality. Was that your opinion of Scutt in 1987?
At that time, yes.
And if we could zoom back on the whole document, we can see under the reliability part of the grid, can always be relied upon to produce excellent work with a bare minimum of supervision. So no concerns at that time about the need to supervise Stephen Scutt?
No.
And if we could go now to 22317, please, it's tab B26. This is a security service note for file about debriefing Mr. Scutt on the 7th of July 1987. I'll give you a moment to just refresh your memory about that. It's fair to say, isn't it, the security service appear to have been very impressed with Mr. Scott as well.
Certainly.
Could we look at paragraph 3, please, and in particular the first half of that? At 13:15, there was a break for a sandwich lunch laid on by F4. HN95 held forth on how boring were the people in the SWP. The women were ugly, and there were few individuals who were inclined to make jokes or tell funny stories. They spent all their time thinking along narrow ideological lines. One could not watch football, for example, because it was considered ideologically unsound. If we stop there, is that an accurate record of the conversation over lunch?
I have no recollection of the conversation whatsoever.
Do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of the security service in recording these details?
No.
It would appear then that in your presence, one of your officers, Stephen Scott, was talking about the SWP in these terms, including saying that the women were ugly.
Apparently so.
Would I be right to assume from your earlier evidence that that is something, an observation that would pass without any remark from you?
Yeah, I don't remember it, but yes, it would do. It would have done then.
And the dismissive attitude towards activists and the particularly dismissive attitudes towards women, are they representative of the culture within the SDS?
No.
How can you say that in the light of the evidence we've looked at earlier today?
Well, because it's only occurred on a few occasions.
Could we take that down now, please? Back to Mr. Scott. At this point in time, the summer of 1987, you are very happy with him. The security service are praising him. Is he proud of his achievements?
He was a very uncommunicative officer.
Did you get the impression that he liked being an SDS undercover officer?
Oh, yes.
And that it gave him a sense of identity?
I don't know if that is the correct term for him, but he certainly, I think, for a lot of his career in Special Branch, had wanted to be an SDS officer.
So very important to him.
I think so, yes.
Important to his self-esteem.
Maybe.
But then things sour, don't they?
Yes.
If we go to 740925, this is the 1988 AQR. Could we look at the other comment section at the bottom? Not signed by you this time, but signed by HM109, because presumably you've been promoted in the interim.
Correct.
DC Scott, with whom I have not previously worked, is a capable officer with a strong competitive character. When tasked, the officer has provided well-presented and researched product. In the 6 months I have worked with him, however, I have gained the impression that he has been operating on a minimum requirement level, which I do not consider satisfies the extremely high standards of self-motivation or self-discipline that his current posting requires. The officer gives the impression of being and wishing to remain a very private individual and has exhibited a divisive side to his character. I understand from your witness statement that those are observations with which you wholeheartedly agreed at the time. Is that fair?
It's fair, yes.
Can you help us with what your own experience of Scott had been, which caused you wholeheartedly to identify with those remarks?
When I first went to SDS, as you've seen from the annual appraisal I gave him, he was a good, hard-working and appeared a committed officer, and he produced quite a lot of good intelligence reports. However, over the year under review here, coming up to this appraisal, my opinion of him was he had started to become lazy. He had achieved what he saw, and this is only my opinion, he had achieved what he saw was a level within the SDS with which he was happy. And having got to that level, he would have assumed that he only had to produce a minimum amount of work to maintain that level. He was one, if you like, to coin a phrase, he was one of the top dogs on the unit. My DI came to me and he said to me, I have to do Stephen Scott's appraisal. How do you want me to do it? I said to him, what do you mean? He said, I can give him a bland appraisal if that's what you want, or I can do it as I see fit. I said to him, you do it as you see fit, and I will deal with it. That's where this came from.
At that stage, was there anything else other than declining productivity?
Yes. On a number of occasions, I had asked the officer for his home address and for the registration details of his vehicle, so I could take the appropriate action in safeguarding both of those. On each occasion, he has been very dismissive with me, saying that's not necessary where I live, and I know I'm not allowed to mention exactly where he lives, but he lived in Norfolk. I'm perfectly safe out there. There's no need to do that, or there's no need to take any action in regard to my car. And until he actually left SDS, I still had never got that information from him. He was reluctant to provide it.
Anything else at that stage?
I can't put a time scale on it, but I do remember that I think my DI drew Scott's personal file, on which, at the beginning of his career, when he joined the Metropolitan Police as a uniformed constable, in those days one was encouraged to write a short essay about one's life so far. This essay he'd written had included details of his career in the army and what he'd been up to in the army, and he'd made no secret of the fact on diverse occasions of his work with the SAS, and I think as he was a lieutenant, according to him. And I remember that from having worked with him on C Squad before. Having looked at this, and again I think it was the DI's initiative which I approved, we went to the army and got his army record out. And his army record was totally different from the story he had been telling about himself. If you want, I can give you a few details of that. But
what I would like to know is of the assertions he'd made about his military career, had you personally heard him make any such claims orally?
Yes. When I worked with him in the 1980s on the right wing desk, I was a sergeant then, he was a DC, part of that.
What was it that caused HN 109 to be sufficiently suspicious to call the MOD in and look at his military file?
I think you really ought to address that question to him, but I'm pretty sure that he thought he was lazy, he didn't trust him, and I could see this as well, he had one motivation, and that was money.
And you suspected him of being a braggart?
Yes.
And possibly a Walter Mitty?
Definitely.
Could we take down that document and have up 749454, please? Our understanding is that this is the pen picture from Mr. Scott's file. It's really very difficult to read. Are you able to help us one way or the other as to whether we are correct that this is his pen picture?
I can't remember.
I'm going to give you the opportunity in due course over the luncheon adjournment to look at this. I don't think it's fair to ask you to look at it now. But our reading of that document is that it does not make particularly spectacular claims about his military career. It talks about him being in the Royal Army Medical Corps in Germany, skiing and so forth. And I'm going to ask you after lunch to clarify whether your concerns about his claims came from what he'd said as opposed to what he wrote. But we will park that for the moment. Coming back to his lack of productivity, did you or HN 109 do anything about that?
By this time, I had some suspicion that he was not only being unproductive, but that quite frankly, we didn't really know who he was at all. And he'd been very, very unforthcoming about his home life, about anything else that other than his work. I do have a memory of tasking him with producing 2 reports. One, from memory, was there was a dispute at the time with the nurses, and I wanted a report on the SWP involvement in that report. The other one, I can't remember. Anyway, I gave him a week to produce them, and he produced nothing for me. So I asked him once more. He never did produce those reports, in spite of the fact that what I'd given him was a lawful order.
Did you ever confront him with his disobedience of your lawful order or his productivity generally?
In broad terms, I suspect I must have done. I can't exactly remember what I said to him, but I would have said something like, you know, you've got 1 more week to get this to me, or
what?
Or I'll have to look further. I don't know how I'd have phrased it to him, but he did not comply with what I told him to do.
And how far did you press his failure to provide his address to you?
I must have asked him on several occasions, and he every time pushed it to one side.
Did he give you an ultimatum? Sorry, did you give him an ultimatum?
I don't remember doing it specifically like that.
Was there anything else?
Well, there was a lot that developed later on, which I wasn't privy to, but I'm not going to go into that.
At that time,
yeah.
What I'm driving at is, you've mentioned that you thought he was very interested in money.
Yes, he was.
Were there any concerns at that time about his expenses claims?
Not specifically, no. But I do remember one occasion at a meeting on the Monday when he said to me, "I'm sorry, I had to go into SWP headquarters on Saturday and Sunday, knowing full well that those were his rest days." And I suppose he expected me to say, "That's all right, just charge it to the overtime." Whereas, of course, what I said to him was, "Well, I'm sorry, but that's your problem. I didn't authorise it. You're not going to get paid for it." And he just shrugged his shoulders and walked off.
Can you help us with whether you were involved in confronting Stephen Scott with his unfavourable AQR?
Yes.
Could you describe what happened?
From memory, I contacted him and I told him to meet me at our West London premises, which he did. I think the DI was with me at the same time. I went through the issues I've just been through with you, and I told him that with his appraisal I had there, I considered that I couldn't trust him anymore, that the trust had broken down between us, and in consequence of that, I was going to recommend his removal from SDS.
What was his reaction?
I think he blamed the DI, first off, without saying anything to me. I don't think he reacted particularly at the time. He just took the APA, the appraisal, and left the flat.
Was there anything about his demeanour that gave away how he was feeling at that time?
Not that I noticed, no.
Could we take this document down now, please, and have up 740927? This is a memorandum dated the 20th of April 1988, so the day after the AQR, it's very soon in time afterwards. Signed by you. Could we have a look, please, first of all at paragraph 2. Having been in post for over 2 years, he was extremely good. He has extremely good access to the party hierarchy and to its headquarters at Empson Street, E3. However, his work return is not, in my opinion, what can be expected from an experienced SDS officer, and it is now perfectly clear that he is submitting what he considers to be a bare minimum return, which over the last 6 months has consisted mostly of lists of names and short reports on individuals. Only 2 reports are of merit during this time, and these were submitted only when I specifically tasked him with producing the information. It would appear from those last 2 lines that he had complied with at least some requests for specific information. Is that right?
Probably, but I don't think those refer to the 2 I referred to earlier.
And there is a similarity between the wording of this paragraph and the AQR. Mm-hmm. And is that because at this stage you and HM109 are completely in lockstep in your views about Stephen Scott?
We are.
Could we have paragraph 3, please? This officer is essentially a very private and very intelligent individual who constantly seeks to manipulate persons and situations to his own advantage. While some of these qualities may be ideal for an SDS officer to have, Scott does not draw a distinction in this respect between his work, his colleagues, and his supervisory officers. As such, to have drawn the officer's attention to his poor work record, which should not in any case be necessary on a squad, which by its very nature demands high self-motivation with minimum supervision, would only have temporarily cured the problem. And I have no doubt that Scott would soon have returned to his former ways. First of all, seeks to manipulate persons and situations to his own advantage. Is there anything over and above what you've already told us, and having regard to the need not to divulge any state secrets or breach any anonymity orders, is anything else you want to add there to substantiate the proposition that he was manipulative?
Having known him as a young DC, and now on this squad, and having seen how he tries to control others, I think manipulate is probably a very good choice of word. He will exploit anything where he thinks he can gain an advantage.
But if you knew that from your time before the SDS, why are you writing such a glowing report about him in 1987?
My thoughts on him from the early 80s were that he could be like that. I did not recruit him. He was recruited before I got there. And when I got there, he was producing good work. So I thought perhaps he may have mended his ways.
Going towards the bottom of the paragraph, it says, to have drawn the officer's attention to his work record would only have temporarily cured the problem. It appears from the near contemporary document, the natural inference from that is that you had not confronted him with his poor productivity. Is that fair?
I don't know, I can't remember specifically saying that to him, but I must have said something. I wouldn't have just served an appraisal on him with those comments on it without speaking to him beforehand.
Paragraph 4, please. On Tuesday the 19th of April 1988, at 1:10 p.m. at our West London OP, I was present when DI 109 served Scutt with his AQR. In view of the comments in the report, with which I totally concur, I told Scutt that I would be recommending his immediate withdrawal from SDS duties. Scutt then said to me, "Is there any other reason behind this?" And I reiterated the reason for my recommendation to withdraw him. The officer then went to the toilet, made a brief telephone call, and came back into the room. He pointed at DI HN 109 and said, "You've achieved your purpose, HN 109, well done, super." I then rebuked him for the remark and he left the premises. Is that an accurate record of what happened?
As accurate as it can be, yes. It's basically my memory of it, yeah.
And had you discussed with HN 109 that you were going to tell him at this meeting that he was going to be removed from the unit?
Yes. When you say removed from the unit, that would have been my recommendation to the Chief Superintendent.
Thank you. He is, as you've pointed out, well placed. There is always the question of the operational security of the SDS to take into account, isn't there, if you're going to inflict some penalty on an officer? You're nodding for the transcript.
Yes.
A concern that he might take umbrage and do something that might compromise the SDS operation.
Quite possibly.
What was it about this particular dilemma for the SDS, as opposed to others that we've heard evidence about, that drove you to the conclusion that Scutt had to go?
I couldn't trust him. It's as simple as that.
And again, drawing the comparison between the fact that you didn't trust your officers to tell you the truth about sexual relationships, what is it about the lack of trust here that is different?
His lack of work, his aloofness, his attempts to control field officers in the SDS and be what we would call, as I said before, top dog. I found him a disruptive influence within the SDS. And quite frankly, I don't think he should ever have been recruited.
So your concerns about Scutt's impact on the dynamics within the SDS and the lack of trust and the impossibility of managing him in those circumstances you regarded as a far more important matter than the possibility that your officers were having sex with members of the public?
It was a different, totally different aspect.
Could we go to paragraph 5, please? Scott has been told that he will be interviewed by you next week, and I have therefore given him until Sunday the 1st of May 1988 to complete his withdrawal from field duties. It is anticipated that he will take a period of leave before returning to special branch duties at Central Office. The officer currently has 50 rest days owing to him in addition to his annual leave. First of all, the 1st of May 1988 was 12 days after breaking the news to Scott.
Yes.
That is not very long for an SDS undercover officer to exfiltrate, is it?
No?
Far less time than normal.
Yes.
Was the date influenced by the fact that you were going to go to Bram's Hill on a training course?
Yes.
And is it right that he was left to himself to arrange his exfiltration?
Yes, that would be the normal course of events.
Just to compare him to some of his contemporaries, first of all, HN 33, by all means, consult the key first.
Yes.
HN 33 has told us that they pretended to emigrate to Australia, sent postcards, cannot recall who to, no indication there or elsewhere whether the withdrawal took place over a prolonged period, but long enough for her target group to organise a leaving gift, a leaving party, and so forth. And so a more carefully structured exfiltration.
Yes.
Fair enough?
Yes. Yeah.
HN 88, I'll give you a moment to refresh your memory.
88. Yes.
Always had a plan that his cover story was going to be that he was going to go to France with his girlfriend, and that would cover his extraction.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And he told his group that that was what he was going to do, and so the road was all ready for him to travel when the time came. Carefully executed exfiltration strategy. Scott was deprived of that opportunity, wasn't he?
Yes.
For a man who was very proud of being in the SDS and had wanted it very much, and had until the 19th of April the impression that his managers thought he was well placed in providing very good intelligence, it must have come as a considerable blow to be removed from the unit, mustn't it?
I think the blow, yes, to being removed from the unit, and also actually being challenged, probably for the first time in his career.
Moving from that, there was the added pressure of having to arrange exfiltration suddenly and without preparation. That would have been a source of considerable stress to him, wouldn't it?
He was a very intelligent officer, and it is not without precedent that officers have had to extract themselves. I can't actually remember doing that.
News of Scott's impending departure went down very badly in certain quarters, didn't it?
Yes.
Can you help us with the reaction of Bob Lambert, please?
Personally, to me, I didn't have a reaction from him, but I understand there was a reaction, unfortunately, when I was away with him and a couple of other officers with the DI concerned. The result of removing Scott split the SDS unit almost down the middle, with some officers supporting Scott and others not supporting him. And those who supported him on the basis of their ignorance of exactly what he was up to, which came out later on.
That support manifested itself, did it, in some people thinking he should stay on the unit?
Almost certainly, yes.
Did it also extend to some people thinking that the date that had been set for his exfiltration was too short?
Nobody on the unit, to my recollection, ever said that to me, although, as you rightly say, I did it to try and achieve this before I went on the course. However, I do understand that his leaving was extended on a couple of occasions.
Yes, it was extended twice. Was there a feeling amongst your UCOs that if Scott could suddenly be pulled out of their infiltration, it might happen to them and it might put them at risk?
Not that I know of. You'd have to ask them that.
Was that concern ever ventilated to you?
No.
Apart from the forthcoming course at Bramshill, was your severe displeasure at Scott's behaviour a reinforcing factor in setting a very short deadline?
It may well have been. I wanted to achieve this exit as quickly as possible. I did not want it to fester, and to give him 2-3 months to leave would have given him 2 or 3 months to think about how he was going to challenge this, what he was going to do about it. I wanted it done as quickly as possible.
Accepting that there were competing factors for you to balance, in hindsight, shouldn't the period have been a bit longer than 12 days?
As far as I was concerned, no. No.
Moving to the split, were Lambert, Dines and HN8 all part of the group who were supporting Scott?
I think, yes, I got it, yeah. As far as I understand, yes.
Would you describe them as a cabal?
Not sure I'd use that word.
How would you describe them?
Misguided.
Other than a difference of view in the handling of Stephen Scott's case, did you otherwise get on well with those 3 officers?
Yes, I got on well with them. Yep. Yes.
The incident which you say occurred while you were at Bramshill, is that the incident in which HN 109 says he was pushed against either a wall or a window by Bob Lambert?
Correct.
Could you help us with when you first learned about that?
I've thought about that a lot, and I have no recollection of HN 109 even mentioning that to me when I came back from Bramshill. And I only learnt about it, to the best of my knowledge, when I started doing my statement.
Did HN 109 say anything to you about his relationship with Lambert, Dines and HN 8 during this period?
Nothing I can specifically remember.
How influential were Lambert and Dines within the unit at the time?
They were quite influential. They were within the same target organisation, which was possibly at the top of our list at the time.
top of your list in terms of not only importance but also prestige for the officer?
Prestige for the officer, if you like, and the importance of keeping our penetration of that organisation up to speed in terms of the criminality they could cause.
You go to Bramshill. Did you keep in touch with HN 109 about this thorny issue whilst you were at Bramshill?
No.
Did you make any arrangements for HM 109 to be supported during that period?
No, he took over as the acting chief inspector, and that was it. I did seriously try and postpone the course, but I was not allowed to.
As you have said, and no doubt you've seen from the documents we've sent you to refresh your memory, the deadline for SCUP's extraction was extended, and there was also a meeting at which Lambert, Dines and HN8 met a very senior officer. Was it usual for undercover officers to go and meet a senior officer to talk about a personnel issue?
No.
When did you learn about that for the first time?
I can't remember. A long time afterwards.
When you came back from Bramshill, or much later than that?
I don't know, to be honest.
If you'd known about it, what would your reaction have been?
The reaction I think I would have had, which would have accorded with HN 109's, would have been quite simply that if our senior officers had accorded with their views and Scut had been retained on SDS, he would have won and we would have had to leave the unit.
Your position would have been completely undermined.
Absolutely.
But they didn't do that. They backed you, didn't they?
They did.
You come back from Bramshill, as far as we understand it, on the 10th of June 1988 or thereabouts. Is that right?
Sounds about right.
By that stage, the second extended deadline had expired, and Scut had been incommunicado since the 6th of June, so for several days. Can you recall the terms in which you were appraised of the situation upon your return?
I would probably have had a meeting firstly with HN 109, the DI, and I might well have had a meeting with the Chief Superintendent, Mr. Parker, to bring me up to date as to exactly where we were in this situation.
There is some evidence that Scut had cried when he spoke to Detective Sergeant Sutcliffe on Saturday the 4th of June, the last contact which had been had with him. Was that fact communicated to you?
No.
Were any concerns about Scut's welfare communicated to you?
None that I can remember.
Had Scut ever cried before, to your knowledge?
No.
In a 1980s police environment, was male police officers crying common?
No.
Almost unprecedented?
Yes.
If you had been told that, what difference would it have made?
None whatsoever.
Crocodile tears, in your opinion?
Absolutely.
North Yorkshire Police found Mr. Scut, didn't they?
Apparently so, yes.
If we look at 740934, it is a briefing note from TN67, dated the 13th of June. If we look at paragraph 1, 12th of June 1988 at 11:15, Sergeant Beach, North Yorkshire Police, contacted Special Branch Reserve to confirm the identity of Detective Constable Stephen Scutt, who was detained at York Police Station. If we go down to paragraph 2, please. Give you a moment to look at that. But Scutt has been found sleeping rough, hasn't he?
Apparently so.
And there was a concern that he'd been consuming some pills, and because he refused to cooperate, he was taken to the police station. If we go to paragraph 3, please. Searched at the police station, his annual appraisal report is found in his possession, together with correspondence relating to another person. Scutt appears to have admitted his true identity, and local police are under the impression that the correspondence in his possession relates to a friend. These details were in fact Scutt's SDS identity, but naturally I encourage local police to believe that their theory regarding the friend was correct. First of all, presumably in his undercover identity, Stephen Scutt most certainly should not have been carrying his AQR with him.
Exactly. One wonders why he did that.
Nor should he have revealed his true identity to local police.
No.
Were you told of these developments rapidly?
I can't remember exactly when I was told, but I was told about them.
And if we go to paragraph 7, Commander Gunn was informed at 11:20 hours, and at his instigation arrangements were made for DCI 337, WC Blank and DS Dines to travel to York and collect Scutt and take him to the Metropolitan Police Nursing Home at Peel Centre. Presumably Dines was sent as a friendly face?
I would presume so.
Did Dines report back to you after this trip to Yorkshire?
No.
Did you have any interest in talking to him about what he might have gleaned from Scutt?
No, because if I remember correctly, at this point, this aspect of the whole saga was taken away from me in my capacity as the manager of SDS and was being dealt with by other officers at Special Branch.
He's one of your officers. It's been a very difficult and divisive issue for you to manage along with HN 109. It's an extraordinary thing to have happened up in North Yorkshire. Were you not curious to know?
Knowing what I did about the man, I'm afraid I found his sleeping on a park bench with his annual appraisal in his pocket merely part of his attempt to bring, how can I put it, to bring notice to himself. And I think that he would not have spoken to me at all if I'd tried to speak to him, and it was better that others take up that mantle.
My question is directed at whether you spoke to Dines when he got back from Yorkshire.
I don't remember speaking to John Dines at all.
Why, in these extraordinary circumstances, were you not interested to know?
Because the officer had, as far as I was concerned, he'd been removed from SDS. Others were dealing with that side of things. My boss, Mr. Parker, in conjunction with the commander, had used other officers to collect him. I played no part in that at all.
I'm getting the impression that you were just glad to see the back of him. Is that fair?
It's not an unfair comment, yes.
Could we take that document down now and go to 740892? Page 7, please. Minute number 8, third paragraph. This is Commander Gunn's minute. As you are aware, it is my firm view that DC Scott's case should be pursued on a welfare medical basis unless and until we have good reason to institute discipline inquiries. As such, we must now await the outcome of medical psychiatric examination of him before taking any further action. Did you keep in contact with Commander Gunn as events unfolded?
I think in one or two aspects I may have done, but I was kept, as I realise now, out of the loop on lots of developments following on from this.
Now, the assertion that there would have to be good reason to institute discipline inquiries. By this stage, you would no doubt say that you could put together quite a long charge sheet.
You've got to look at it in the wider context. If I were to institute discipline inquiries against him, he could throw the whole SDS operation into the spotlight and may result in the SDS operation being totally closed down.
Was that a paramount consideration during the handling of Mr. Scott's case?
It would have been, and that would have been probably at commander level.
Because would it be fair to say that the commander here is clearly shying away from disciplinary action when it could have been instituted?
Disciplinary action could have, in the light of subsequent developments, which we've not gone into, it could easily have he could easily have been disciplined, yes.
Well, it's not quite my question.
Oh, sorry.
You are quite right that more comes to light in due course, in an even longer charge sheet. But even by this stage, if the disciplinary course had been chosen, there was ammunition, wasn't there? Because he disclosed himself to the North Yorkshire Police, he disobeyed your orders, so on and so forth.
In that, there was enough there to remove him from SDS anyway.
And the reason that that course is being shied away from is operational security, isn't it?
Yes.
And it leaves two choices. He goes back to Special Branch and does something else, which had been the original plan, or he's medically discharged.
Yes. If you look at it, all I did was remove him from one squad in Special Branch, and I would have arranged a posting to another squad in Special Branch. That's all that was behind it.
The original plan was he was just going to go to B squad, I think.
I can't remember now, yes. But
that can be checked.
yeah.
Can we just explore that?
Right.
The elsewhere in Special Branch option, you've got a man who you think is resistant to orders, who is dishonest, and frankly you don't trust him as far as you can throw him.
That's a fair assumption.
And yet you think it would be okay for him to go to B squad, where presumably those qualities would be equally unwelcome.
I didn't choose B squad. Let me say that straight away. I have no knowledge of that whatsoever.
Anywhere within Special Branch, I could put this facetiously, there's nowhere in Special Branch that would welcome those qualities, is there?
Probably not, but there were places then where we would put former SDS officers where they were out of the public view. And he could have been put into one place where he could have been supervised, he would have done a 9 to 5 5-days-a-week job working in an office all the while. He would have had no opportunity to get up to the tricks he got up to on SDS.
We have no opportunity to destroy the SDS, but he would have the opportunity to continue to behave dishonestly and insubordinately within Special Branch, wouldn't he?
If that's his chosen way, I suppose he would, yes.
And was the fact at that stage that he was going to be moved internally despite those very serious concerns about him, as opposed to being disciplined, again, because of concerns about operational security?
Sorry, I've not quite got the...
Well, if you
tenor of
discipline
the
him, he
question.
might blow the whistle, mightn't
Oh,
he?
yes, yes, of course.
And that's why the decision is, even though we've got a lot of concerns about him, let's give him a second chance somewhere else on Special Branch.
I think some of that was rather an academic exercise, and I say that because of my own opinion of the man is, once he'd been removed from this pinnacle of his career, in his opinion, he would not be able to show his face in Special Branch again. And I have no doubt that had things gone in a different direction in terms of his so-called mental welfare, he may well just have resigned anyway.
But in terms of risk to the SDS operation, it was safer to move him than it was to discipline him. Is that fair?
Yes.
Coming to the other option, a medical discharge. Now, it's very clear from the documents and from your evidence today, you just don't believe that Mr. Scott was suffering mentally at all, do you?
Correct.
Mr. Scott was medically discharged on the opinion of a consultant psychiatrist, wasn't he?
So I understand.
Would it be fair to say that understanding of mental health issues amongst males was very underdeveloped in the 1980s?
Probably.
And that in any event you had a very strong view that this was all a put-on job?
I knew how manipulative he was.
Might it have been the case that although Mr. Scott behaved very badly, he was also extremely adversely affected by his fall from grace, and that he was indeed psychologically harmed by the consequences ultimately of his own actions?
I don't believe so. I really don't. I think his fall from grace is what he couldn't accept. And as I've said earlier, for the first time in his life and his career, he'd been challenged. And I don't think he was able to cope with that, because he knew that there was more to be found out about him.
There was another problem with medical discharge, wasn't there? From your point of view, is it comes with a pension, doesn't it?
Yes, apparently it does.
Well, you knew that, didn't you?
I knew that.
And it was leaving something of a taste in your mouth.
Well, it was one way that he could secure an exit from the Metropolitan Police with some money. I don't think he gained a lot of money out of it.
And then there was a gloss on the system, wasn't there, called an injury award, where if the medical discharge was attributable to service, there
Yes.
was an enhancement.
So I understand, yes.
And being entirely frank, would it be right that that would have been particularly galling to watch Scott receive?
Yes.
Could we, in this minute on page 7, we've had the third paragraph. We've got, if we look, we can see that he's pending medical examination, and there is plainly a concern about which direction to take. If we pick it up now by moving on to 740892, page 8, same document, page 8, minute 9. This is again Commander Gunn. I'll give you a moment to cast your eye over it. There is a concern there that SDS officers might find medical discharges convenient, and there had been previous examples, hadn't there?
There had.
Did that dilemma, the concern about it being an easy way out for officers, vis-a-vis the need to protect the operational security of the SDS, did that dilemma feature in conversations that you had with Commander Gunn?
No, Commander Gunn did not discuss this with me at all.
Was it something that was an issue that you considered and thought about?
I may well have thought about it.
Did you discuss it with HM 109?
May well have done, can't remember specifically.
And where did you come out in your consideration of that issue?
To be honest, I would say that we thought he was pulling the wool over everyone's eyes and he should not be entitled to anything.
Did you think he should have been disciplined or medically discharged?
The discipline question, again, would not have been one for me. It would have been for someone higher up the chain. But as we've said already, there would have been cautions to that. That would have had to be considered very, very carefully. And if I can add a postscript to this, in Stephen Scutt's, in his name, that as far as I was concerned afterwards, even though we took a lot of precautions, there was never any indication that he said anything about SDS operations or SDS safe places. We had nothing at all.
Could we take that document down now, please, and go to 24605? This is a Security Service note for file dated the 15th of June 1988, and it records the fact that the Security Service are being told about the Scutt affair. And if we look at paragraph 1, please. During the afternoon of the 15th of June 1988, DIHN 109, second in command of the SDS, visited F4 at Bolton Street. HN 109 brought evil tidings concerning HN 95. The latter had long been regarded as one of the bright stars in the SDS firmament, producing first-rate reporting on the SWP. The SWP management now fear that their star has collapsed, or worse, may supernova. They appear to be given to dramatic language,
Yes,
don't they?
Exactly.
Could we go to paragraph 4, please, on page 2? under the heading "The Problem," there are 3 long paragraphs. If we start with paragraph 4, it seems to suggest that Scott resented control, was untruthful, made false claims about his background and where he was living. In other words, it's a recitation of the issues you've described. Could we go to paragraph 5, please? Subsequently, HN95 refused to speak with SDS management or senior officers from S Squad. He has also refused to cut his hair, shave his beard, or desist from his agent appearance. He did agree, however, to attend sessions with the police psychiatrist at Hendon, where he claimed victimization and mental disorder because of the pressure of work. An investigating officer from outside S Squad has been appointed and was due to interview HN95 on Wednesday, the 15th of June. SDS are preparing a damage assessment, but meanwhile are continuing to run their remaining cases. The Home Office has not been briefed to date. Following the fiasco with another UCO late last year, serials blank and blank refer, SDS are very worried about their future. There's 2 things hanging in the air. Home Office haven't been told, SDS worried about their future. Is it right that there was concern about the SDS's future, that if Scott turned supernova, it might be curtains?
Yes.
And that, amongst other things, the Home Office would be one of the places where an adverse reaction would come from?
Quite possibly, although my understanding is that very few people in the Home Office actually knew of the SDS operation.
And then if we go to paragraph 6, HM109 assesses HN95 to be a con man who has bluffed his way past police colleagues and superiors for a long time. He is now furious at finally coming unstuck. He is also a greedy man, and this was responsible for the frauds he has allegedly committed. HM109 suspects that what HN95 now wants is an honourable medical discharge with a lump sum and a pension. The question is, what will he do if he does not get it and is faced with prosecution? Precisely the dilemma we've been discussing.
Yes.
If we could take that down, please. And could we go to 740892? This, at page 11, please, is a minute, again from Commander Gunn. And I'll give you a moment to look at the text. The phrase in particular, I fear that little will be achieved in pursuing any disciplinary action against Scott. Indeed, we have more to lose. More to lose being the risk he would blow the operation.
Correct.
I know I've asked you before about your communications with Commander Gunn, but I would like to be clear, just for the avoidance of doubt. Did he discuss this dilemma with you at this stage in July?
No.
Could we now have 740935, please? we could move to the substantive text. Page 2, please. This is a medical opinion about Mr. Scott. If we look, please, at the penultimate paragraph. Let me just get the precise reference. Yeah, so the paragraph below that, please. It is quite difficult to handle these issues when we cannot have full information, and I must necessarily go upon what he gives me. It was hinted by his commander that he had been having an affair in the group which he had infiltrated, though I have been able to get no hint of this from him. I was also unable to get a hint of it from the inspector who brought him down from Scotland and with whom I discussed his case briefly. There is obviously a lot going on here that I cannot know about, and I rather feel that the whole thing is now a bit explosive, and I will not be available to defuse it. Did you know anything about whether or not Stephen Scott was involved in sexual activity with a member of the public in his undercover identity?
I have no knowledge of that whatsoever.
Was the issue raised with you by Commander Gunn at all?
No.
If we zoom back out, and on the first page, if we just have a look at the medical summary, the large paragraph on the first page, I will give you a moment to read that. I'm particularly interested in the passage towards the bottom. The way in which he was withdrawn was unique and hurtful. It put him at risk and his colleagues at risk and excited a great deal of resentment among skilled colleagues whose opinion he valued deeply. Would you accept that is how Mr. Scott felt?
Probably. The opinions that he would value deeply would be the opinions of those who were supporting him.
And the manner of his withdrawal did cause resentment amongst colleagues, didn't it?
Yes.
This ended up in his being told that he could not have the dinner that was normally given to people who had come out, or that if he did, senior officers would not attend. It was normal to dine out a departing officer, wasn't it?
We didn't dine them out, as you say. We would have a lunch at one of the flats.
Would it be right that, given your views about Mr. Scott and HN 109's views about Mr. Scott, there was no way that you were going to attend any such lunch?
Absolutely correct.
This ended up in his being, all this seems to be a calculated disgrace which hurts him very deeply, and he assures me that he was told that his removal was entirely on the basis of his AQR and nothing else. Do you have any reason to doubt that for Mr. Scott, it did appear to him as a calculated disgrace which hurt him very deeply?
I don't accept that.
He was leaving in disgrace, wasn't he?
He was leaving because he'd been removed from the SDS because of his lack of work, etc., etc.
That's a yes, isn't it?
I'm looking at this, which I can see has a lot of comments from the commander where he vehemently disagrees with what's been written here.
My question to you is that this man is experiencing a considerable fall from grace, isn't he?
A fall from grace, yes.
Which, putting aside whose fault it was, or even assuming it was all his own doing, still something which affected him very deeply.
I think it would only have affected him in terms of how much we knew about his activities and what he was up to. I think mentally he was quite capable of coping with this, but that is my opinion only.
So would that be a convenient moment to break for lunch?
Certainly it would. You wanted the witness to look at the handwritten self-report by Scott when he joined the police.
Yes.
I don't know what arrangements are going to be made for that, but can it be ensured that they are made?
Yes.
Right, we'll break now for an hour.